I see what I see without noticing it. And since I don't see what I see, I get in a mess and live as if I am me or somebody else, and I don't notice. This little poem was written by Mahmoud Darwish, a Palestinian poet and peace activist. I think that this poem, with great brevity, speaks to issues facing us in our time because of privilege or distance, or distraction or bias, and in living in an age of sound bites. We have this incredible capacity to walk around with glazed eyes, missing our connection to the things around us. Let us think about these connections. Perhaps we have a few nationalities represented in our congregation today. How many states? From Maine to California. The banana I ate this morning came from Colombia, and the coffee that I drank this morning came from Ethiopia. If we were to look at the tags in our garments, where would we find? Pakistan, Cambodia, Indonesia, maybe China. But outside of consuming from these places, I know very little of them. Don't really have a clear picture of what it looks like to be a human in any of these places. Now, we approach our gospel message today and witness a border being crossed with the words of a simple invitation. An invitation to open one's eyes. Eyes that were once glazed with indifference and bias, meeting the glory of God face to face. So Jesus, in our passage, is calling disciples to him. And Philip goes to Nathanael and says, "We have found the very one described in the Mosaic Law and the prophets, Jesus, son of Joseph, from Nazareth." To which Nathanael replies, "Nazareth? Can anything good come from Nazareth?" And perhaps there are a few reasons for Nathanael's comment. In the times of Jesus, Nazareth was a tiny town of perhaps 800 people, located in central Galilee, known basically as a poor farming town. There's nothing spectacular about this place at all. And surely, Nathanael thought, if there's someone coming whom the prophets talk about, this person would not come from such a place. There's more to the story than this. Nazareth, again, is in central Galilee. And in 6 CE, the local protectorate of King Herod was changed over to protectorate of Quirinius. And local taxes in the area were doubled. This led to a revolt by bandits led by Judas the Galilean against this Roman occupation. As a result of this revolt, there was a massacre, and many Jews, both in Galilee and elsewhere, were crucified. So as a poor place, as a place that bred revolutionary bandits, Galilee and Nazareth in particular would not have been a fitting place for the coming Messiah. But there's this wonderful turn in the text, one of my favorite turns in the Gospels, which when Nathanael says, "Nazareth, can anything good come from Nazareth?" Philip doesn't debate him. He just says, "Come and see." For this is an invitation. Nathanael is asked to witness what is happening, to experience for himself the good news, and to be undone by meeting Jesus face to face. As you know, I've spent the last 12 days and Israel and just returned yesterday morning. As a quick plug, I will be giving a presentation on my trip on February 19th at the Soup and Conversation. I hope that's okay to do in the pulpit. And in any case, you will see how bad a photographer I really am, so I'll be showing my own photographs. Upon leaving Tel Aviv on Friday night, our plane was hit by lightning. And after the pilot assured us several times that everything was okay, one of my friends from our trip turned to me and said, "Surely God would not strike down a plane carrying 30 seminary students coming back from the Holy Land." Which, as John pointed out, that God didn't listen to Tebow yesterday, so why would he listen to seminary students? But the idea of returning from the Holy Land was interesting to me, and it made me think a lot about, well, what is this Holy Land that we talk about? Our trip was organized through an organization called Mejdi, which attempts to provide a dual narrative to the conflict in this area of the world. We had tour leaders who were both Israeli and Palestinian. Soldiers, former soldiers who had lost friends and family. And Palestinians who had lost everything. We met with people in refugee camps. We met with a family in Sderot, which is the town closest to Gaza, which is constantly bombed. We met with many people who, despite all of this, were striving for justice and peace for everyone. We also met with those whose ideologies would likely never get them to peace. This was a difficult thing on many levels. No, in all honesty, for being in the Holy Land, I can't say that I felt particularly holy. We did touristy things for a few days and visited various holy sites. The Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, the Church of the Assumption in Nazareth, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem, which I was told is run by 4 different orders of Christians who fight physically about their space and who use, I don't know the term for this, but really tall rods with the crosses on the top. They don't just walk around with those, they also bonk each other on the heads with them. We visited the Sea of Galilee, the Dead Sea, Masada, the Western Wall in Jerusalem, Alaska Mosque, the tomb of the patriarchs in Hebron. And I have to admit, again, I have very little connection to these places. Perhaps it's because for the first 6 days of this trip, we had heard the narratives of individuals living in this land. The stories of suffering, stubbornness, and hope. You know, growing up on a farm in central Ohio, I never met an Israeli, and I never met a Palestinian. I had some Jewish friends. That's about as close as it gets. I never knew any Muslims. And even today, despite the fact I'm in seminary, I have very limited engagement with this part of the world. I think perhaps this trip showed me that my ignorance is bigger than what I even assumed. And when it comes to this part of the world, we know that this is a focal point of so much of our news, so much of our politics, so much of our religion. But again, I admit that I treated this part of the world with indifference. But to experience what this conflict is like firsthand, and to hear the stories of people who are working for peace, was undoing for me. Ahmed's family had lived in Silwan, a town just outside the old city, for 7 generations. On the last night of Ramadan in 2008, Ramadan is a 30-day fast, so he would have been tired, exhausted, for Muslims. Ahmed came out of his house to scream, and his 2 sons were being beaten by the butt of a gun, an M16, was settled in his neighborhood. Ahmed tried to intervene, and the settlers shot him in the leg. Other Palestinians came out of their houses to see what was going on. And the settler chased them back, firing into the crowds, and they retreated. Ahmed's sons came over, huddling over him. The settler came back and then shot him in the other leg. To this day, this person has never been prosecuted. And when we met Ahmed, he had a severe limp and walked with a cane. Now, when I think about anger, I think that if anyone has the reason to be angry, it would be someone like him. What did he do with this anger? I think so often we frame this conflict as a war of extremes. But there are new voices. There are different voices. Instead of turning to extremism, he turned to hope. He founded the Wadi Hawa Information and Community Center in Silwan. The center provides music lessons to children and educational services to women. He's still angry, but he channeled this energy into something peaceful, something powerful, something that filled a community with hope. But if there are settlers, there are also wonderful Israeli Jews who are working to promote peace and healing, like Rabbi Eric Asherman of Rabbis for Human Rights. Native of Pennsylvania, he addresses the concept of human rights in Israel and Palestine for both Palestinians and Israelis. When I met him, I was completely struck by the energy that he brought to this. I would think that a conflict like this would just drain someone. But his energy was kinetic, and it moved through our group. Absolutely incredible stuff. So there are, in Silwan in particular, a number of houses are being confiscated so that Israeli government can do archaeological digging. These houses are confiscated from Palestinians. It's illegal by law in Israel and also by international law. So Rabbi Asherman rebuilt the house for a Palestinian family. The government came back and tore it down. So Rabbi Asherman rebuilt it again. And Palestinian families brought their children to these events so that they could experience what it was like for Jewish people to be helping. Because for Palestinians and for Israelis on both sides, that type of experience just doesn't really exist. The Holy Land is an unsettling place. Here are the holy places of 3 major religions. And all I saw was conflict, hatred, and separation. There are physical borders everywhere, walls and fences, border crossings. Palestinians have a number of permits to get from one place to another. There are parts in territories where Israelis cannot go. Many times these walls separate friends from friends and neighbors from neighbors. In this place I was undone. And I was forced to see with new eyes. See, in 1 Samuel 3, we read of Samuel's calling. In those days, God did not speak to the people. The text states that the priest Eli was losing his sight, which is commonly interpreted as a sign that his ability to communicate with God was dwindling. And one night, God comes to Eli's young apprentice in the form of a vision and calls him by name, Samuel. Samuel gets up and asks Eli what he wants, but it wasn't Eli who called, so he lays back down. Then here's Samuel, and he gets back up and asks Eli what he wants. And Eli didn't want anything, so he lays back down. Then he hears Samuel, and he gets back up, asks Eli what he wants. But Eli says, maybe something more is going on here. Maybe it's the Lord who is calling Samuel. And tells the young lad, I think as it's put in our text today, to go lay back down. And if he hears his name again, say, "Speak, Lord, your servant hears." What an unexpected calling. In a time when God's presence is no longer being felt in the community, and the word of the Lord is not being transmitted, God comes to a child and calls this child into service. And perhaps we learn something from this calling. For what is the Christian faith if it's not a calling? A calling to heal, a calling to encourage, a calling to be prophetic, a calling to all, regardless of where we're born, who our families are, or how much money we make. Our calling is a calling to be undone, to cross borders, to learn, to experience, to do justice when it comes to our relationship to the other. Now, in Judaism, Hillel the Elder is an important figure, and he's described with two important sayings. One is the Golden Rule, which we all know. The other one goes like this. If I am not for myself, then who is for me? If I am not for others, then who am I? If not now, then when? I'm going to use one of my favorite words in philosophy. I love what Hillel is doing here because he's asking us a question, an ontological question. He's asking us, what is it that makes us who we are? What makes us human? What makes us human beings? We do not challenge ourselves to learn about those around us, to advocate, to be for others. Then Hillel here is raising the question of, well, then what makes us human? I don't know if we are born into sin, but I know that we're born around it. In this world, let alone our own communities, trauma begets trauma, and the cycle of brokenness continues. And our strange calling asks us to consider this trauma, to break down the boundaries that separate us from the other and hear a new story. It's an invitation to come and see, as it was for Nathaniel. And it is an invitation to listen to God's voice, as it was for Samuel. Perhaps it's in these things that we find the holy, not just in holy places. But in the stories of people who are working good. And in this place I found stubborn, hard-working people. I've come to believe that the work of peace is actually something that only stubborn people can do. So maybe that's something we could think about. And then while we are called to come and see, and we are told to listen, the prophet Micah tells us one more thing. The Lord has told you, O people, what is good, and what does the Lord require of you? But to do justice, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with your God. For justice itself does not come by seeing or listening, but by doing. It is the work of these stubborn people that I have come to greatly admire, those who feel with empathy for the other. The heartache of losing your home, the heartache of losing loved ones. And this doing is found all over the place in Israel. It is found at Nevi Shalom, Wahat el-Salam, which is translated the Oasis of Peace, where Palestinians and Jews live together in one community and face the struggle of what that's like every time an issue in this country, an issue over there pops up. It is found in one of our tour guides, Aziz Abu Sara, who lost his brother to injustice and made a decision that he will not let the other be his enemy. It is found in a Druze family. Druze are a Muslim sect that serve in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force. This particular family lost a brother and 2 sons during this conflict. And they had every reason to be angry. But again, they took that anger and did something positive with it. And they formed a coalition of parents who were grieving for lost ones on every side of the conflict. Israeli Jews, Palestinian Muslims, Palestinian Christians. For in these people, we find that an enemy is often only a person like you or I, whose stories we have yet to hear. You know, to be undone is a difficult thing, and it's a terrible calling. It's not a comfortable place. There are no easy fixes. And often, it's a place where confusion and chaos reigns, as opposed to order. And it is also something that we can pass by very quickly without noticing. In our poem today by Darwish, we so often pass through these conflicts. We see them, but we don't see them. And Hillel perhaps reminds us the cost of that not seeing. So in conclusion, I ask that when we consider our Christian faith, we consider this odd and wondrous calling to be a little uncomfortable from time to time, to be engaged in the other, for that is who we are. If we do these things, we will see the face of our God.